at this point, I would like to introduce our moderator before handing over to him to handle today's panel discussion. So Dr. Ron Sookram is an executive at the Atta Lockjack Global School of Business at the the University of the West Indies, where he holds the position of academic director. As a prominent figure in corporate governance, he leads governance interventions and designs customized governance training for boards of private and public listed companies, state-owned enterprises, civil society organizations, and credit unions. With over 15 years of experience at the Lockjack Global School of Business, Dr. Sookram has held various executive roles, including Director of Client Solutions, Deputy Academic Director, Director of the Center for Social Responsibility and Corporate Governance, and also Director of the Doctorate in Business Administration program. Ron also was a director here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, and we are very pleased to have him moderate this panel for us, Day 2 of Governance Week 2024. Ron, welcome, and I hand over this segment to you.
Thank you, Kamala. Good afternoon, all members in the audience, and of course, a special welcome to our panel members today to our session that focuses on effective oversight for sustainable outcomes. As Kamala would have mentioned, we have a wonderful and exciting panel lineup here for you. I will first introduce you to Mr. Ian John, who is a technology futurist with specific interests in attempting to systematically explore predictions and possibilities about the future and how they can emerge from the present to impact our peoples, communities, societies, and ultimately our way of life. He is the former and final Senior Vice President and Regional CEO of Massey Technologies Infocom before transitioning Massey Technologies to its new owner in 2022. His latest challenge as the CEO of CyberEye Limited is securing the most valued assets of businesses and organizations from the global cyber threat. CyberEye Limited is a cybersecurity company that provides solutions and services to protect organizations from digital attacks. So we welcome Mr. Ian John with us this afternoon. Secondly, we have Ms. Simone Pearson, who is Group General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Pan Jamaica Group Limited, a publicly listed multinational with global businesses in specialty food, property and infrastructure, financial services, and global services in shipping and logistics, hospitality, and attractions. At Pan Jamaica, Simone is responsible for leading the legal and governance portfolio of the group's international businesses. Simone is also serves as Corporate Secretary of Jamaica Product Producers Group Limited, a publicly listed investment holding company. And of course, we have our beloved, I will say, Chair, Nigel Romano, who as indicated by Kamala, would have filled in this role in a short notice, but we are, of course, know him very well as leading this institution for several years. And out of that, he has a very extensive career in banking and finance and holds several directorships across listed and other types of organizations. So welcome, panelists, and good afternoon to everyone once again. I will simply ask each of you, beginning with Ian, to share 8 to 10 minutes on this topic of effective oversight for the sustainable outcomes. So Simone, you'll go second, and we'll followed by Nigel. So Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon to everyone. My pleasure being here this afternoon. I'm a visual learner, so speaking without visual aids is a bit of a challenge sometimes. Having said that, I think this topic is a very important topic, and I simply want to share the context of why I think it's extremely crucial in terms of being able to provide effective oversight for sustainable outcome. And I was thinking about the topic and was hoping that I might have been able to change it, and change it to the setting that we are in. So I'm going to play with it a little bit in terms of effective oversight for sustainable outcome in this new epoch, right? This new age that we're in. So when we talk about futurists, our role is really trying to look at the future and really trying to understand how the future will impact humanity. And I have to say that we live in one of the most exciting times in all of human history. If you are a historian or a student of history, you would know that the past 100 years has been the most profoundly transformative across all aspects of human civilization. And just think about that for a second. Humans being on planet Earth for thousands of years, but the past 100 years has been the most transformative. And when we think about things like the advancement in technology or just the pure unparalleled advancement, how it has reshaped human society and improved the quality of life, and expand the human capabilities and opened up a lot of opportunities. It really talks about the significance of the past 100 years when compared to all of human history. And I don't know about you, but that is a pretty daunting, when you think about all the things that has happened compared to the last 2,000, 4,000 years of human history. But something is about to change, and futurists all over the world have predicted, and I think I heard Mr. Rowe mention it today, and Professor Ellington also spoke about it on his opening, that the next 10 years is going to bring more change than the previous 100. Now, I just want you to consider, what does that mean? The next 10 years on human Earth is going to bring more change than all of the changes that has taken place in the past 100 years. And so I think Sunday opening was so excellent. We had a bit of history. We had a bit of economics. We spoke about Schumpeter, and one of my favorite economists, Nikolai Kondratiev. I actually to go take a read on him if you're not familiar with him. But here's a guy who predicted the long economic cycle and basically talked about economics changing in 70-year period and 50-year period. And eventually he was executed by the Russian Tsar. Again, the Russian has been on the wrong side of history. Again, a very interesting story. But here we are today with the prediction that in today's time, we are now in the age of connectedness. And we talk about these cycles of changes and these cycles of changes that are taking place. In the age of connectedness, we are now seeing where the cycle of changes are not necessarily measured in time, but they are measured by the impact of some of the mega trends. And these mega trends are technology, mostly technology, but we do have some like climate change and the green energy. And I'm going to add a new one. Since World War II, we now have war as a mega trend that is destabilizing. And really, really and truly, we also have to understand how that can impact the organization and the oversight to sustainable outcomes, right? There are things like migration that we also need to look at as well. But ostensibly, the other mega trends that are impacting and influencing and disrupting and upending industries are happening at light speed, warp speed. And, on one end, we think about, everyone thinks about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is the least of our worries, right? As we speak, every minute, there are thousands and thousands of new inventions that are being created worldwide. And now a lot of these inventions are being created by AI. So these inventions will go on to create value, new products and services. And part of the topic that we've been speaking about today will go on to bring generation of wealth generation. So now we have our AI that is creating wealth, right? So We also looked at the the EF, the World Economic Forum, the Davos conference earlier this year, and there were several top risks that they identified, and I'm not going to go through those, but just to say the impact of AI on humanity. As we move into a world of everything digital, cyber risk is becoming a threat. And again, we see that evolving and emerging in the Caribbean as well. Myself, leading one of the leading cyber security companies in the Caribbean, can tell you that we're seeing some very, very sophisticated types of attacks that are taking place. And then again, being fueled by the intelligence of AI is misinformation and disinformation, which has the ability to destabilize economies and influence elections and influence behaviors, particularly among our younger citizens in our countries, right? So here's a real issue for us. And then fourth, we have, for the first time in the history of the planet, we have 5 generations in the workplace simultaneously. I mean, think about the nightmare in terms of recruitment and attracting and and retaining talent, and the expectations of the Gen Zs and the Alphas. This is a real challenge for managing outputs and sustaining outputs. So in essence, we are in what I call an inflection point. And, the inflection point is really bringing a lot of rapid change at breakneck speed, right? We also have the issue of data, where everything runs on data, and data is increasing. It's doubling every 2 years. So decisions that have to be made, the amount of data that has to be consumed to be able to make right decisions and right investments, right? And then we have the fusion of biosystems, human systems with digital systems. And now if you can integrate with a digital systems, you now have a competitive advantage over the individual who cannot, integrate with that digital system. So we are in a world of everything connected. And as Michael Dell said some 25 years ago, thought at the speed of light. It is now a reality. So what does this mean for us in terms of, effectively providing oversight for sustainable outcomes? What does that mean for a board? What does it mean for the executives? What vast array of information must be available, and the decision making must be so timely, so quick, so decisive, for us to have the type of outcomes that we require. So the other thing I wanted to put on the table, and after I put this, I'll leave it there to be part of the discussion going forward, is this change is happening as we speak. So a new world economic model is being forged as we speak. New ways of generating wealth, new industries are being created, new economic rules. And so sometimes I wonder, if we understand the rules, these new rules, are we paying attention to these new rules? Are we paying attention to what wealth generation means in this new age? And I'll leave you with a case study. I was at a conference in Mexico 2 weeks ago, and almost all of the speakers were lamenting the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Caribbean. And all of these economists were saying, well, we are still trying to recover in the Caribbean. All of the Caribbean countries have declined in terms of GDP and output, and we have not retained pre-pandemic positions in terms of our economic growth. And I sat there and I listened. And then I had the chance to take the microphone, and I said, to my colleagues, during the COVID-19 pandemic, consider that the world's wealth increased to almost $500 quadrillion. And also consider that during that period, the world billionaires increased by 600. A few persons on planet Earth were now generating wealth upwards of $13 trillion per annum during the pandemic, during the time when all of the Caribbean suffered economic decline. So I put this to us as a group and as a body as a question. Are we sure we are overseeing, or have we set the right vision? Have we set big, audacious goals for our region, for our organizations, for our people? Because something has changed. And from where I sit, we are not getting our fair share of the pie. And I am in many boardrooms. I have been sitting on many boards across the region. And sometimes what I see is the oversight of maintaining the status quo, maintaining what has been done. Yes, we want growth, but it's almost like an open loop where you just put the inputs in and this is what you want. And once I get the profits that I want, that's all I care about. And I think it was Ms. Kwamina was saying, so long as the performance is there, so long as the emergency is not there, so long as it hasn't collapsed, it's business as usual. So this afternoon, I put to you that it is not business as usual. And the old rules or the prevailing rules do not apply. And to take the words of Elon Musk in his biography, we need a maniacal sense of urgency to understand what the new rules are for this new epoch, this new age. I yield, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. John. So we've seen issues of rapid change, which brings with it complexity, new challenges, of course, challenging the status quo, and eventually the new rules or definitions that we have to consider to deal with this new normal or this rapid change that we are now experiencing and going to intensify in the next 10 years. I'll now ask Ms. Pearson to share her comments on this issue.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks, Ian. And first, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be on the panel with such a distinguished panel of very agile, very accomplished speakers. And I think, you know, seeing the chairman's agility and just kind of jumping in and taking on the challenge of being on the panel at the last minute probably gives a statement about what it is that we need to think about as directors as we exercise an oversight function going forward. Because I think listening to Ian, I think that was a very compelling discussion. And I think if there's one thing that kind of I got from that whole, from what Ian had to say is that we're all required to be futurists. You know, I found that quite interesting in his bio that he described himself as a futurist. And I thought, gosh, you know, the reality is that that is what is required of boards, quite frankly, and that's what's required for an oversight function in this turbulent and unpredictable time. So I think he's left us with a lot to think about and a lot to consider, and especially for those exercising an oversight function, you know, what does that actually mean in terms of how you govern? And I wanted to just point out there that, you know, one of the first things that I think I wanted to take all of what and endorse what Ian said and kind of bring us back down into the board function or the oversight function and think about how it is that a board is expected to exercise their role in light of this changing environment. And I think when I looked at the topic for today's discussion, one of the first things that popped out to me is just the word sustainability. What do we actually mean by that? You know, because sustainability can mean so many different things. It depends Now, there are lots, without a doubt, there are many things that I think we would all commonly agree are required for sustainability, for long-term sustainability of any organization, right? Certainly in respect to climate change, in respect of some of the geopolitical turmoil that we see happening around the world. But I think one of the first and most important parts of a board or any other governing body's role in this is to understand what does sustainability mean for that particular organization in light of all of these things and all of these factors that are happening. What does it actually mean? And it's to make sure it doesn't end up being some kind of a generic term that we just throw out. I think the board exercises a very important role in conjunction with management to really define in a very meaningful way what sustainability actually means for that organization. And I think that's a challenge of the board in this sort of climate, in this kind of environment that Ian described so well. The important function that the board has to exercise is not just to figure out how it is that you define what sustainability is, and then to make it these issues a strategic priority for that organization, a real imperative, and to tie it in and align it with all the strategic imperatives of that particular business or that particular body. So the board plays an important role in terms of making sure that the mission, the vision, the values of the company are aligned with these goals, these goals for sustainability, and ensuring that there are proper accountability frameworks in place for them to be able to measure management's performance against these imperatives, right? I think the board's role is particularly important in terms of long-term planning. The board has to bring that long-term vision to the table, even when management is not necessarily thinking ahead in that particular way. And I think the board has got to help to define what management needs to prioritize in terms of achieving some of these long-term goals. And I was going to go on to say that the composition of the board, I think, is particularly important in this respect. I think given the difficulty in defining what some of these things mean, I think it's important for us to think about how we actually compose the board. Who are the people? Do we have the right skills in place? Do we have the right people who can look ahead and be futurists and consider some of these important issues? And I think as well, thinking about boards taking a fresh look at their executive team, at leadership of their organizations, constantly putting in place mechanisms to assess whether or not we have the right teams or the organization has the right team to position their business for these long-term goals. So those are some of the things that I wanted to highlight. And I think, again, setting that framework, the board's role in setting that framework for the entire organization and making sure that risk management is aligned with achieving some of these imperatives is also tremendously important. Yeah. So I think those are the few thoughts that I'll share for the time being, and then I'll hand over to the chairman.
Thank you so much, Simone.
Mm-hmm.
Insightful.
Sure.
And appreciate the anchoring back on the role of the board in terms of the context in what would it need to do. And you look at the title similar to what Ian has said, think about oversight, but we're really talking about direction here. And with direction, then you'll be able to have some form of framework that you will understand both with management on the board and what exactly you're having oversight over. So direction is important. We're thinking about the future. So where are we going, and the role of the board in that context, which speaks to understanding oversight, direction, as well as the role of the board in the context of sustainable outcomes. But I will now ask Nigel to weigh in on this discussion before we begin to basically engage in further elaboration and arguments, you may say, over this point. Nigel.
Thank you. Very interesting. The word that jumps out to me is effective oversight. And in my experience, and based on all the research and readings I've done, the problem that most of us face, and in this particular case, it's an existential problem if we fail, is execution. How do we get these things done? How do we ensure that the organizations that we lead, the executives that we guide, have the necessary focus to ensure that they are doing what needs to be done today to move us to the outcomes that we need to achieve to survive this existential threat that the planet is facing. And for me, critical there, and both Simone and Ian referred to wildly important, big, hairy, audacious goals, and the sustainable development goals are, if anything, not big, hairy, and audacious, and quite frankly, frightening. But we also need to be very clear about how we prioritize, because we cannot boil the ocean, although in fact what we are doing is ending up boiling the ocean. The planet is doing that for us, but we as individuals cannot boil the ocean. We need to focus. We need in each of our situations to choose the one or two very, very important actions that we can take to move us closer to achieving the goal. And we need to be constantly measuring. If we do X, we should get Y. Are we getting Y? And if we are not getting Y, are we pivoting? Are we adjusting? Are we adapting to ensure that we continue to see the progress that is necessary? We also have to clearly choose the right levers, the leading indicators. And for me, there are two things that are necessary to define those leading indicators, those levers. One, if we do it, we will get the results that will get us closer to the goal. And two, we have the ability to influence it. Because if we can't influence it, then we should not be bothering with it. So that leverage is very important. The other very important thing we need to focus on is what do the teams, the departments, the people, the guys on the front line, what do they need to measure so that they will know if they are having an impact? So we need those, as Franklin Covey describes it, those player scorecards. Scorecards that the guys on the front line can see and can monitor to ensure that, hey, if I do this, I can see progress. And if I'm not seeing progress, how do I adapt? And of course, the final piece is, one, we don't do it by dictating. We do it by engaging, by involving them in the conversation. But having had them in the conversation and gotten them to make the promises and commit, we then have to hold them accountable. We have to say, okay, you promised to do X. Did you do X? Yes, I did X. Did you achieve the expected outcome? Yes, I did. Or, no, I am not sure. I need help. How can I help? And for me, that disciplined execution, the focus, the prioritization on the widely important or the big, hairy, audacious goal, choosing the right levers, the player scorecards, and that accountability cadence is critical to us moving forward to achieve these very important goals that we are looking at. So for me, that is what we need, and I would welcome the conversation. So I'll hand it back to you, Ron.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Very interesting perspectives from the three of you. And to begin the dialogue and the discussion around it, the last point that you reemphasize, which I support in terms of the discipline of execution and holding people accountable. My question is, before we execute, we need to know where we're going, and having this perspective of the unknown, because the truth is, I think, as Simone would have pointed out, we are not too clear what exactly we need to do and what does sustainability or sustainable outcomes in our context, have we really defined that? So my question is basically, from your own observations regionally, do you think, and this is out to any member of the panel, that we have at the board level truly recognize what sustainability management is about, and therefore how do we govern to that point, and therefore identify what do we really need to do? Or is it still a process of understanding that we have not reached to be able to come up with the right strategic priorities to execute? I'll leave it that way. Any comments? Ian.
Yeah, I love your statement, and I'll just finish it. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, right? And then another phrase is, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? So to put it in context in terms of from where I sit, effective oversight. Oversight can be effective if the goal is, the outcome and the goal is to create 100 widgets.
Yeah. Got you.
At a profit of 10% or 15%. And next year we'll do 20%. And if that is the goal of the organization, and the board has looked and adjudicated over that, and the management has delivered that, that is success, right? Okay. In the context of what we're looking at is looking at the wider economical, global environment and the rate of change, the velocity of change, and understanding how that will impact the governance, the regulatory, the compliance, what risk will be brought, and what opportunities, if we don't tap into this new wave, we are going to likely be missing out on, right? So it's almost akin to, changing the tire of the car while the car is moving. And by the way, it's much more easier to refuel a jet or airplane than change the car while it's moving, right? And you've seen that in Formula One. You must come for a pit stop. Now, we might change it very quickly, but you must come for a pit stop, right? So the organization has to continue to perform. It has to continue to deliver. The executives have to continue to deliver, and the board has to continue to look and say, okay, long term, I think these are the 5 areas of innovations that we need to be looking at, and we need to look at what is the investment needed here. And we need to set up a team that will be looking at the innovation. And now let's look at the research and the development, or let's look at the management of that. But this has to happen relatively quickly. And I urge everybody to read Elon Musk's biography. It's an eye-opener. It's an eye-opener of how the boardroom has been upended, how he's created mantras such as question everything, question every regulation. Question every single regulation. That is why the car company is the largest in the world. That is why he's already going to the moon and will be going to Mars. That is why we have the chip going into the brain, right? So it's a matter of questioning everything and leaving no stones unturned. I want to give an example of what typically would happen in some of the boardrooms. I mean, I've been in some exceptional boardrooms and seen some really good practices in terms of good governance, right? But when we think about a board meeting, in some instances quarterly, right? Maybe monthly, but very rare now monthly. That's probably the small organization or an organization that is in crisis, perhaps. But quarterly, biannually, some once a year, some don't meet at all, right? I mean, that's a fact, right? What sort of oversight can you provide when you are looking at lagging performance KPIs and data? You're looking at history. You're not necessarily driving the future. And in some instances, I speak to organizations and they tell me they benchmark against this organization and that organization. But I have news for you. When you benchmark, you're using at least minimum 2 years old data. You're benchmarking against data that is 2 years old. We're talking about technology and innovation and new markets and new opportunities that are being created at the speed of light. So just the cadence and the speed at which we are now required to provide effective oversight, that has changed. Just the regularity and the quality of data and the information, it requires a change in how we look at reviews and reports and what we look at. And I'll just pause there for Simone and Chairman to comment.
Yeah, if I can just add to what Ian was saying, I mean, I think, you know, I think the challenge really is how do you, I think for many boards and for many businesses, we tend to hold the fort more than to look ahead and to see how, you know, how we can continue to evolve. And I think the first thing that any organization or certainly any board or any oversight body needs to recognize is that is to first recognize that we're living in these massively changing times. And I think we need to start out with that, just that general acknowledgement and understanding that this train is moving while you're also trying to maintain it at the same time. And to understand that that is going to require a very fresh way of thinking and require you to rethink some of the structures that you have in place. But I really do believe that the starting point is recognizing that it's a constantly shifting it's a shifting ground that you're on every single day, and you've got to think about how it is that you keep moving and how it is that you keep going with that. And you know, of course, you've got to maintain what you have. I mean, that's also incredibly important. You have shareholders, you are accountable to others. So it's not to say that I'm advocating for, you know, anyone to be overly risky or to take on any you know, particularly risky practices. But I do think that what's required of boards now is this understanding that if you don't stay on top of these trends, you'll drown. And to make sure that once you acknowledge that and that enters the room or enters the discussion, you think about what that actually means for the systems that you have in place. Because I think ultimately governance, and Ian alluded to this, governance comes down to structures and frameworks. Directors don't simply govern on their own. They govern within a framework. They govern within a policy, within a structure of policies and frameworks and, you know, risk management and that sort of thing. And I think once we acknowledge that this is a constantly evolving world and an evolving space, we need to be ready to, our boards need to be ready to stay very agile and to make sure that they constantly rethink all of these structures and frameworks, you know, and also the team and the way that these organizations are managed. So I think the board has an incredibly important role in making sure that these things all form a part of the vision and the values of the company. And I think an important value is to stay looking ahead, you know, to stay making sure that you stay on top of all of these trends that are constantly evolving. And I think once the board is in a position to define that and make that an important imperative for the organization, then everything cascades down from there. But I do think it does require a board that's comfortable with, you know, re-looking and rethinking at the way that they govern. Well, you know, what kinds of reports do you get? Are the reports sufficient? Is the reporting framework going to work? Is it going to keep taking you to where it is that this organization needs to go? Are some of these systems antiquated? Do you need to rethink them? And I think a lot of that also comes down to making sure that you choose the right leadership team. Making sure you have a leadership team that is able to stay agile. Because I think one of the difficulties, again, the board is not management. And I think that a lot of today's messages are making sure that we understand the difference between oversight and management. So the two sides have to work in tandem. And the board, given that the board is not managing and it's overseeing, then there's a sense of there being a lag between, what you're relying very heavily on what management is reporting to you. You're not in the day-to-day and the cut and thrust of what is happening in a business or what's happening in an organization. You're relying very much on reporting. You're relying on management in so many ways to kind of help you to set the vision and the direction of your business. And I think what's required is giving a fresh look at some of those ways of reporting and the way that you interact with management, rethinking whether or not those things still work. Do you have the right people in place to keep the organization moving forward? Are they doing their job in terms of keeping you up to date and pulling out the right issues for you to consider so that you can effectively oversee the organization in a futuristic, forward-looking manner?
So Simone, I mean, when you think about both your comments from Ian and yourself, directors have to see themselves as change agents, because if we're talking about relying so heavily on management in terms of reporting, it's supposed to be the other way around. They will report on what you want, so what you consider to be priorities. So the board has to change what the KPIs that are being identified to be reported on, because management responds to that. And as a result, if we do not have in that collective body called the board, that change in mindset of how business should be approached, because we talk about capitalism and the value system inherent in that. I do not think in the region, and all due respect for our business leaders, that has resonated to the extent that we need to change our business model to incorporate or integrate those sustainability issues. And I think that's a challenge that we have not robustly addressed. And therefore, that is the point of departure for these kind of new outlook in challenging the status quo. But I of course, I submit to you for your comments again.
What I would say is this: I like the dynamic between running the business and changing the business, and understand very clearly. Running the business takes up most of your time. It's 80% of your time, and you have to make sure the business keeps running. And then 20% of the time you have to look at, okay, what do I need to focus on to move the business forward, to move closer to those sustainable development goals, whatever the goals are. The distinction I like to make between the guidance or the direction is, are we doing the right things? So the board should be asking that question. Are we doing the right things? And are we prioritizing enough so that we focus on those one or two things that will help us to make the changes necessary? Management, on the other hand, is involved. Are we doing things right? So are we being as efficient and effective as possible? So that dynamic is there. But without the prioritization, without the focus on the critical, vital few things that we need to do, we will not get the changes that are necessary. And that conversation has to be an important conversation between in the boardroom, between the board and the leadership teams, and between the leadership teams and their teams. So for me, that is critical.
So we think again about the profiles of our companies. I mean, some of you represent, public listed companies, which, I heard Ian talk about research and development and the innovation, which is critical. But if you place that in the context of a smaller SME, or even some of our companies that really and truly their only exposure to global or international business is from the sourcing point of view in terms of the supply chain, but not really doing business beyond that. Navigating that transition that they need, when we talk about priorities, that will become secondary because they are focused on surviving. And so you wonder, in such situations, how do we effect the beginning of that mindset of change to get them to even understand the importance of that sustainability outcome, or that perspective that says, listen, for us to survive, for us to have business continuity, this is no longer, add-ons or only for a large company, but it's part of your need to survive. How do you get a small business? How do you get an indigenous company that is on the verge of just growing, not really expanded beyond the local market, into that kind of conversation? Keeping in mind our SMEs is the largest part of the economy. So if we talk about knock-on effect and net impact of this change, how do we incorporate them in this conversation?
That is a tough question.
I don't, of course, I can't even answer. But how, even in the context of CCGI, can we create that framework for that kind of dialogue and that understanding? I mean, this is just questions that, because even the big companies don't get it right at the moment.
Yeah.
In the boardrooms, that conversation is not being given that kind of strategic focus. It's being spoken about in the peripherals. But when it comes down to, as you said, Ian, a board meeting, 80% is focused on deliverables of profits and the KPIs that are financially heavily monitored, which is the reality of the game.
And for me, in the case of the SMEs or the small, medium-sized enterprises, the incentive, there must be some incentive from the government, from the international, the multilateral organization and multinational organizations to encourage small and medium-sized enterprises to want to adopt the changes necessary. They're not going to do it on their own, because it's for me, it's going to be just too expensive. So there has to be that, whether it's the United Nations, the World Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, they need to come up with some sort of incentive that said, if you do this, or if you would like to do this, here is some technical assistance, here is some financial assistance, and here is how we're going to assess the outcomes with very, very specific leading measures. But to expect a small family business to jump and do this on their own, I don't think it's reasonable. So that, for me, that would be something to look at. Kamala, sorry.
So yeah, I want to add to that, Nigel. Sorry, Simone, just for 1 minute to share the reality on the ground that really and truly we do need the larger corporations to lead the way, because a lot of these SMEs are part of the value chain. So most of them who have made some changes, who are thinking sustainability, it's because there's a measurement that was put in place that says, in order for me to be able to provide services to this large company or the government or whatever, that is why I now need to bring some of my practices in alignment a certain way. So that's where we have seen the button move a little bit, but you are absolutely right. It is too onerous to expect SMEs and small family-owned businesses to be able to make this move. So as much as we are engaged in a lot of education and awareness, it really takes all of us to move that needle. And we do need the larger organizations to be the ones who are prepared to make that step forward. There are two questions in the chat. Ron, if you don't mind, I know we are not yet to that half hour to engage the Q&A, but there's one from Avia about, how do we build that strategy for the Caribbean nations? But there's an extremely, what I'll call it provocative submission from Novak. And so if we can ask Novak to share his perspective, and I want to ask, yes, in the region, we are small. We don't have the kind of dollars that Elon Musk is working with. But what would be our mindset if we had to provide oversight over an Elon Musk, So can we ask Novak if he is able to unmute and share his thoughts?
No, I think that was just a little light-hearted poke at Mr. Musk and his questionable practices based on the media. So I was just suggesting that he may not be the the poster child
May not
for
be the
good governance.
benchmark.
Right. Now, okay, so I agree. Go ahead, Novak.
No, but I think I was kind of replying to Ms. Lindy's point about the point that the Caribbean doesn't have enough data, and it is notoriously difficult to get Caribbean firms to participate in research. Now, the thing is, you can only create tailored strategies based on the information you have at hand. Otherwise, we're just applying knowledge from another context to the Caribbean in a kind of hit and miss approach and hope that something sticks. So I think a foundation block here is sort of getting the firms here, the organizations here to participate in research. And I know that Dr. Sookram is currently looking at some cybersecurity research, and I'm just curious as to the uptake of that research, and it would be indicative of what I'm suggesting here, that Caribbean firms just don't like to sort of feed upwards into the literature.
Well, Caribbean people.
Well, I would suggest that it's people all over the world, so that you have to provide the incentives, and basically, what's in it for me? You have to answer the question: what's in it for me? How do I get them to participate? With the carrot that they will benefit from the research. And I'm sure Ron is pulling his hair out trying to figure out ways to do that. But that's what is necessary.
Yeah. Can I just chime in?
Go ahead.
So I think it was Novak, who was talking about the data. And I mean, I have to say, you're so right. We really have not grasped the wealth generation of data, any type of data, big data, any type of data. And I'll give you two examples. I was in Singapore doing some studies in 2014, and government of Singapore was showing that they allowed persons, civilians, to access government data. This is open data, okay? Which is to say that government just collected all the data, civilian data, ministries, etc., and they just say, okay, here are the data sets, you download, and you figure it out. Within 12 months, there were 300 mobile apps generating millions of dollars in revenue, employing hundreds of young persons. One of my favorite apps was Find the Loo. Tourism country, Singapore being a tourism country, 40 million tourists visits Singapore every year. And on your mobile phone, you can actually look for the closest loo near to you. You find that loo, you can eat off the floor in that loo. I kid you not. It is impeccable. By the way, if you were to find a loo that was not clean, where someone didn't flush, and you reported that in the app, the authorities take that so seriously, they're going to be checking their CCTV to see who was the person who last used it, and that person is going to be charged.
Right.
That's how important data is in first world countries. And that's why I give the case study of why wealth increased during the pandemic, when all of these countries and their citizens moved to digital, there was an increase in income generation on those digital platforms. The opposite happened in our Caribbean region and our third world countries. Data, the appreciation of data.
And the appreciation of data extends to understanding what are for each company within each sector, what are your levers, as Nigel said, as it relates to a sustainability priority. If you don't have that data, you cannot filter, you cannot prioritize as you would like to, because there's a gap of knowledge that you just can't make an informed decision on.
Yeah. But Ron, the other case study I was going to give to you is somehow external companies, international companies, are able to come into our countries
And get the
across
data.
region and access the data.
And get the data.
And then make wealth out of the data. I don't know how many of you have the experience of Starlink.
Yeah. Well,
Anybody has Starlink?
Known about it, yeah.
All right. Very quickly. Cybersecurity company, so I have to have redundancy. It allows me to have internet access without having a local carrier in any one of the Caribbean countries. Okay. I have Starlink, from ordering on an app. It arrived at my doorstep 1 week later. I have not spoken to an employee of Starlink. They did not tell me they were going to bring it at 5 p.m. and they didn't come the next day and they didn't have any excuses. They even went so far, and Nigel, I know you're going to love this one. When it was shipped, when it was manufacturing, they told me it was being manufactured. 24 hours that they told me it was shipped from the factory, and they told me every step of the way where the devices were. And then something shocked me. 3 days before the device actually arrived in the country, Starlink sent a message saying, the goods are now in Panama, but they are already being cleared in customs in Trinidad.
Yeah.
And I scratched my head because I said, wait, our customs in Trinidad clearing the goods? The goods was cleared before the actual package arrived in Trinidad. So that when it arrived, it came straight to my home.
Yes. Yeah.
All data. All data.
Sure.
No human intervention. I now have the fastest internet. I installed it, and in 5 minutes, I was live with internet. And I wonder if the carriers in the Caribbean region understands the impact. Because today it's internet access. Tomorrow it's cell phone. Cell phones are on the way. What does that mean?
And that's your mega trend in terms of the future is because you see and anticipate exactly what most likely will be. And this is what boards have to be thinking about, right?
Correct. So it is what keeps you up at night. The board should be thinking about how is this thing going to impact our existence? How is it going to impact our relevance? And what do we do? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to do something new? Do we need to exit this market that we are in? And exit early so that we can create new markets? And this is just telecommunications. I could go on and on with so many other case studies. That is going to impact the financial sector, the insurance sector, the small and medium enterprises. It's as if we're walking into this nightmare, but we're doing it with our eyes wide open. And we're sipping and we're drinking and we're partying.
Well, I think we're waiting to react, and I think that's a problem, is that we're waiting on all these things to rush over us so we can then react, as opposed to getting ahead of them. But I was going to say, Ian, I can see that you're clearly a hardcore Elon Musk advocate with Starlink and but I won't get into that. I was just going to add that I think what's missing I hear Nigel's point on governments and other developmental bodies providing support, especially for small businesses. I think without a doubt that's important. I think it's going to be hard for businesses of a certain size, especially in countries of jurisdictions that are small, to be able to think ahead, to have the resources. It's always that age-old problem of when you're trying to survive, how much space and how much of a luxury is it for you to look ahead? And I think we need, not just support in that sense, but I do think that we need more platforms to collaborate and to share ideas and to constantly upskill, and just more platforms for us to share. And I think that's particularly powerful for smaller businesses and smaller enterprises. I think we have to pull each other along on this journey, because I think if we think that we are too busy trying to survive, to care, or to think about some of these things, we're making a grave mistake. And I think, you know, going back to the idea of the talking about smaller businesses, I think it's a mistake for them to think that they can't engage at this level, or that they can't participate at this level, or they can't think ahead at this level. Because the truth is that, you know, in this changing world, when some of these things come to fruition in different ways that we can't even imagine now, the first businesses to suffer are the smaller ones. The first places to suffer are the smaller ones, because they're not as diversified, because they don't have scale. So I think it's very important for us all to understand why it's important to make sure that we're focusing on these issues, that we're looking at it at governmental levels, we're looking at it regionally. We make sure that bringing it back to the board again, that these are things that our boards are thinking about. Because I think, having heard Nigel, having heard some of the points that Ron made, you know, we talked a lot about how do we prioritize, how do we identify what these things are. Sustainability is such a wide and woolly subject. What does it mean? But the starting point has to be that the board, as the oversight body, as a body that is responsible for setting the vision and the mission and the strategic priorities of an organization, make these things a priority. It's got to start there, sitting down and really making sure that you understand what sustainability means to you as a business, and how does that connect into sustainability as a nation, as a region. And I think we just need more platforms to talk about it, like what the CCGI is doing, but more platforms to actually share information. The bigger companies have a greater responsibility, I agree, but we just need to find the platforms to actually be able to share and collaborate. And again, taking that back down into the business itself, that collaboration is also so critical for just the board and the management, because without that collaboration, it's going to be impossible to figure out what these priorities are, and how it is that you keep planning ahead for them, and how it is that you keep adapting and staying agile to deal with some of these things, you know, not just as they come up, but actually thinking ahead. Let's make sure that, you know, we get ahead of this, and not just wait for it to hit us. I mean, I think, you know, Ian talked about COVID a little earlier. I mean, there's no way that would have been very hard to foresee that one. But I think we have to make sure we understand the lessons of what it meant to be hit with something that you couldn't foresee, how you were forced to pivot. We all had to learn to adapt. We all had to learn to be agile. We can't lose that. We can't become complacent. We need to make sure that we take these things and